Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. We are delighted to welcome you to the ASEAN Hall for the briefing on the outcomes of the 59th ASEAN Foreign Ministers Meeting and related meetings, which will be delivered by His Excellency Dr. Kau Kim Hourn, Secretary General of ASEAN. We are pleased to welcome members of the diplomatic corps in Jakarta. We are also pleased to welcome representatives from the ASEAN Community in third countries and international organizations, ACTCs, who are joining the briefing virtually. This briefing is also being live streamed on the ASEAN Secretariat's YouTube channel. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we will begin our event with the ASEAN anthem. Please rise. Please be seated. Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, we have now the honor to kindly invite His Excellency Dr. Kau Kim Hourn, Secretary General of ASEAN, to deliver his briefing. SG Dr. Kau, floor is yours, please.
Good morning, Excellencies, members of the committees, the Committee of Permanent Representative to ASEAN. We have a number of ambassadors here, as well as representatives. Excellencies, ambassadors of ASEAN's external partners, we have valid partners, sectoral partners, our partners. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I want to, of course, also extend a warm welcome to all of the members of media, as well as all our friends and Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, joining virtually. I'm pleased to see that many of you are joining us this morning for this briefing on the outcomes of the 59th ASEAN Ministry Meeting, Post-Ministerial conferences, and other related meetings that just took place for the whole week, last week. The theme for this year, of course, is ASEAN in 2026, navigating our future together. People ask me, how did the chair was able to come up with the theme? It's so far-sighted because the theme was conceived last year and so more appropriate for this year. And I think this is the wisdom of our chair, working along with our member states. Well, first of all, I just want to say that the key meeting is the 59th AMM, but this is not the only one. We have other ASEAN plus one meetings as well, what we call the Post-Ministerial conferences. And after that, we have what we call the more or less trilateral and multilateral meetings, which is ASEAN mechanism. We have the ASEAN plus 3 Foreign Ministers meeting, we have the East Asia Foreign Ministers meeting, We have the ASEAN Regional Forum, which of course is at the ministerial level. In addition, we have the trilateral meetings in which we have the ASEAN chair plus the different four sectoral dialogue partners that we have the engagement with, along with ASEAN secretary. Those constitute the trilateral meetings as well. This year, what made this AMM so special is that we commemorated the 50th anniversary of the Treaty of Amity Cooperation in Southeast Asia, or the TAC. And besides the commemoration, the ASEAN chair, along with the member state, hosted or convened the first high-level conference of the high contact parties to the TAC. And based on the actual meetings that took place, I believe, because I attended 1 or 3 breakout sessions, is one of the most dynamic meetings that took place. I want to share with you that before I go to the details of this, that I have been attending many AMMs since, in fact, 2001. So I observe all these annual meetings. This is the annual meetings of the ASEAN Forum, along with the forums from our external partners. And this is one of the most dynamic meetings in terms of the substance that and the issues were raised during the meeting. But of course, also amidst the current global dynamics, global challenges that we have confronting us. At this juncture, I want to express my warmest congratulations to Her Excellency Maria Teresa Villa Lazaro, Secretary of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of the Philippines, and ASEAN Chair for this year for her able chairmanship of the series of meetings. I think her leadership was important, particularly to guide ASEAN for this series of meetings. The meeting was issued the main key document, and that is the joint communique of the 59 AMM. Well, we have many other documents, but this is the main documents that usually try to capture all the essence, all the key points. But you have to read between the lines because there's a lot of what we call issues that are packed, substance packed in between every sentence, every paragraph. So I think usually it takes some of those who are very experienced to understand the substance, the real meanings. So I think the main document that was outcome is the joint communique, or the JC, of the 59 AMM. I also want to share with you that there are other several important outcome documents also that were adopted in the 59 AMM. Let me highlight 4 of them that were the key documents as well. One, of course, the guidelines on the modalities for engagement of ASEAN with highly contacted parties under the Treaty of Amity Cooperation in Southeast Asia. So I think this under TAC, we have now adopted these guidelines on modalities of engagement. Second, of course, the revised guidelines on accession to the 1976 Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia. We revised because take into account of Timor-Leste as our new member. So we want to make sure that we would treat Timor-Leste as equally as an ASEAN member among ASEAN member states, and that's important to revise them. Third, of course, a list of criteria and indicators for ASEAN dialogue partnership. And this is very important because the decision last year by the ASEAN leaders, particularly in relation to the lifting of the moratorium of dialogue partnership. So now we have a list of criteria and indicators for ASEAN dialogue partnership. And of course, the ASEAN forms a statement on the evolving situation in the Middle East. This is very important. This is the third statement that the ASEAN forms has issued with regard to the situation in the Middle East. At the same time, the ministers approved 2 documents. One is the concept paper on the ASEAN Coast Guard Forum and the terms reference of the ASEAN Coast Guard Forum. Basically, we had, Mom said, had a lot of discussions over the years to set up the ASEAN Coast Guard Forum. And finally, now we have all of these documents in place officially. What's important is the necessary procedure for the inclusion of the ASEAN Coast Guard Forum in the Annex 1 of the ASEAN Charter. And this, of course, would be eventually undertaken, but the agreement has been made already. As you can see, ladies and gentlemen, let me just give you the overall of the series of meetings for 1 week. And of course, having participated in many meetings myself, I will share with you that our minister had always frank discussion, very in-depth exchange of view, not only among themselves as the ASEAN state, but also with foreign ministers, and of course had delegations from our external partners, particularly from our partner countries. And that's important because as they examine and exchange views on global and regional developments impacting ASEAN, including increasing geopolitical and geoeconomic uncertainties and the conflict in the Middle East, as well as the Ukraine-Russian conflict as well. I also want to note that the series of meetings provided a great avenue and opportunity for us foreign ministers, and of course for member states, to have their bilateral meetings between themselves, but also with the ministers from our external partners. So there's a lot of bilateral meetings, and based on the information received from the Philippines, that we have, in fact, more than 120 bilateral meetings that took place during a series of meetings. And it showed that there were a lot of meetings, not just polar-side meetings, but proper sit-down bilateral meetings. But of course, polar-side meetings, impromptu meetings among others. For myself, of course, I had also 15 bilateral meetings, as well as 2 polar-side meetings. So again, the discussions were on a wide range of issues that are concerned to ASEAN and our partners. As you see, ladies and gentlemen, in terms of media coverage, I'm sure you've probably seen a lot of media coverage also. There were about roughly 410 media outlets that registered and covered the series of meetings last week. Let me move on quickly to the series meeting. First on the 59 AMM. What were the main outcomes of the 59 AMM? Yeah, let me highlight the following. One, of course, is the TAC. The ministers, after they had a lot of discussion, they stressed the continued relevance of the TAC as a foundation for peaceful coexistence, mutual respect, restraint, and the peaceful settlement of disputes. And I think it's very clear that we still believe strongly in the TAC. I think the minister underlined how relevant and resilient TAC has been, and more so particularly in the current context. Also, there was a discussion on TAC and Timor-Leste, just mentioned, how to bring Timor-Leste on board along with the other ASEAN states. With regard to the second issue under what the minister discussed in the AMM, Timor-Leste membership in ASEAN, looking to identify progress, computer progress, and of course also discuss on the role of Timor-Leste that will be taken up more and more. Timor-Leste will be assuming the role as country coordinator for ASEAN New Zealand dialogue relations for the new cycle that will start next year, 2027-2030 cycle. And this going to be a new cycle will kick off in July 2027. So I think we have already planned that every ASEAN state will have that particular role to play. Also, the discussion on the ASEAN Chairmanship in 2029, in which, of course, Timor-Leste has expressed its willingness and readiness to assume that chairmanship. So the meeting, of course, agreed that this issue will be elevated to ASEAN leaders. They will take up at the 49th ASEAN Summit in November this year. The next issue was on external relations. Now, on external relations here, there are several key issues. One, of course, is the conferment of the status of development partnership on Turkey. After extensive discussions in last year with the decision of ASEAN leaders and the ongoing discussions by some state, particularly at the CPR level and at the foreign minister and senior officials of ASEAN. So the AMM decided to confer the status of development partnership on Turkey, and that will start from here onward. And Malaysia has volunteered to be the country coordinator for ASEAN Turkey dialogue relations. So I think this is very much the meeting decided. Also, the AMM adopted the revised list of criteria and indicators to provide a fair, realistic, and objective basis for the consideration of future dialogue partnership applications. The minister agreed to continue discussion of appropriate modalities to operationalize this process and the moratorium on dialogue partnership in line with ASEAN centrality. Again, so we now have the basis on how we would deal with this issue. I think we are able, of course, to address the request by Turkey now. This is a final decision. Also, the ASEAN Foreign Minister decided to confer the sectoral dialogue partnership on Germany and Qatar. Yes, after they apply and the review process was completed, so the AMM decided to confer the new ASEAN sectoral dialogue partnerships. The meeting groups also agreed and decided to admit United Kingdom as a 28th participant to the ASEAN Regional Forum. This is very clear after exchanging extensive views and discussion on the, particularly not only on the particular issue, but on how ASEAN would continue to work to revitalize the ARF, particularly under the paper that was adopted previously. Now, during the retreat of the ASEAN Foreign meeting, the minister had extensive discussions on a number of issues, including the evolving strategic geopolitical environment, follow-up to ASEAN leaders, review decision on the implementation of 5-point consensus with regard to Myanmar. Of course, there's some discussion on Cambodia-Thailand border, South China Sea. So I want to emphasize that our ministers never shy from discussing the issues that are facing ASEAN. I think this is our considered strength and the resilience. So they had a discussion, very frank discussion in the retreat, very lively discussions, and no one could fall asleep because of the exchange of views. So I want to underline that this is very important. Also, they had discussions on they expressed their concerns of increasing geopolitical rivalry, growing uncertainty in the international order, the proliferation in conflicts. At the same time, to look at both the traditional and non-traditional challenges, including increasing complex transnational and non-traditional security threats that are affecting ASEAN. At the same time, they discussed their concern about the rapidly evolving situation in the Middle East, particularly with the renewed hostilities. And in that regard, of course, as I just mentioned, that they call for great dialogue diplomacy, and they issued their statement. We got to get the statement that I just mentioned is called the ASEAN Foreign Minister Statement on the evolving situation in the Middle East. And I think you can read this quite clearly, the language is very very direct, very clear on what it really means, and it really means. The ASEAN Foreign Minister also reaffirmed their commitment to strengthen coordination across all ASEAN relevant sectoral bodies, particularly in order to mitigate the impact of the crisis on the region, especially the implications for energy security, food security, supply chains, and of course the welfare of the ASEAN nationals. They also expressed deep concern over the humanitarian situation in Gaza, and they underscored the need and obligation to protect civilians and civil infrastructure in accordance with international law and the relevant UN Security Council resolutions. The meeting was also observed its growing prevalence of online scams operations involving multiple nationalities and leading to transnational organized crime, trafficking in person, money laundering issue, and misuse of digital technologies. Again, this is the issue that affecting all of us now, and the need to strengthen regional cooperation. Of course, at ASEAN level, but also between ASEAN and our external partners. So this is very important that we need to strengthen our cooperation at that level. Actually, ladies and gentlemen, let me move on quickly, and that is moving on the need to emphasize on how to minimize the impacts that affect ASEAN peace, security, economic resilience, and ASEAN community efforts. In this regard, the ASEAN ministers reaffirmed that ASEAN unity is entirely, as well as the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific AYP and the TEC, remain the fundamental strategic frameworks for ASEAN to promote cooperation, dialogue, mutual trust, as well as strategic stability, and to ensure that we have an open, transparent, inclusive, and ASEAN-led rule regional orders. On Myanmar, of course, they had a lot of discussion, and I did not go into detail, but the 5-point consensus remains in place. Simply, the role of special envoys of ASEAN Myanmar remains important. There's a discussion on how to move forward on the long term of the role of special envoy of the ASEAN Myanmar. That's also discussed as well, but this is an ongoing discussion. At the same time, the Minister did acknowledge some progress, but the progress, and of course, they need to address the ongoing challenges. They need to work together, especially addressing acts of violence against civilian and public facility. And they urge all parties involved to take concrete action to really halt indiscriminate violence and exercise emotional restraint and protect the civilians. They, of course, also welcome the continuing progress on the provision of human assistance to Myanmar by the ASEAN Center. So this is quite important as well. And they acknowledge the recently concluded meeting on July 12 in Bangkok between ASEAN formers, and they had an informal discussion with Myanmar. The retreat, of course, they also discussed the border situation in Cambodia and Thailand. They welcome the efforts and commitments of both Cambodia and Thailand to uphold and consolidate ceasefire and reaffirm their support for the full and effective implementation. In its entirety, particularly the joint statement of the third special general border committee, GBC, between the two countries that was signed on December 2027, which is essential for the maintenance of peace and stability along the shared border. They also underscored the importance of the ASEAN observation team, currently under the Philippines coordination and ensuring the effective implementation of ceasefire. With regard to South China Sea, there's a lot of discussion as well on this, but I think the message is very clear that they agree we need to make sure that the current negotiation will be concluded COC within this year. and that the COC will have to be in line with the 1982 UNCLOS and of course international law. At the same time, we affirm the importance of maintaining and promoting peace, security, stability, and freedom of navigation and overflight in and over the South China Sea, and particularly, I think also the DOC as well, that we've been working together between ASEAN and China. Let me move on to the Southeast Asian Nuclear Weapon Free Zone Commission meeting. This is also an annual meeting that ASEAN Foreign Minister would meet to discuss and review the work under this particular mechanism. The meeting expressed concern of the increasing challenging global security environment, and particularly emphasized the strategic relevance of the Southeast Asian Nuclear Weapon Free Zone treaty, which was continues to grow. So, despite all of this, this treaty remains increasingly relevant. They of course also stress the importance that we need to have legally binding negative security assurances, particularly as we engage with the 5 nuclear weapon states. At the same time, the member state took note of the failure of the 11th Review Conference of the Parties to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, and to adopt an outcome document in the 3rd consecutive review cycle. So I think it's clearly that it took note that there was a failure. At the same time, also the erosion of the global nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation architecture, particularly in the region during this period we see the missile tests and the developments on the Korean Peninsula. I think it's clear that our ministers have always call on the partners that ASEAN want to make sure that our region is a nuclear-free region, and of course also free of nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. So the concern here is that right now we have the existence of some more than 13,000 nuclear warheads worldwide, and the growing inflammatory nuclear rhetoric that's taking place last year, particularly more so this year. We joined the Manila Protocol because ASEAN member states, through the Santos Treaty, have called for the 5 member states to accede to the Protocol of the Santos Treaty. So they highlight the importance of the strengthening of the implementation of the Santos Treaty through the ASEAN Club and enhance cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, on nuclear safety, nuclear security, safeguards, emergency preparedness and response, as well as peaceful uses of nuclear technology. Let me move on to the engagement with the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commissions on Human Rights. So every year also, ASEAN Foreign Minister will meet with ICHA, which comprises the representative of all the member states, so the member states. Because the Foreign Minister, they do oversee the work of ICHA. They approve the budget, they approve the work plan of ICHA. Of course, when in the face with ICHA, the Minister commended the work and the meaningful contribution of ICHA to ASEAN community building, and encourage them to continue to ensure that their priority will continue to be kept with the evolving situations facing the people. And they, of course, also discuss on the need to have the Declaration on the Rights to Mental Health of Children in the Digital Age, strengthening efforts to promote safe digital ecosystem, to protect the vulnerable, and of course bringing a strong human rights perspective to combating online scams, for mainstreaming the rights of persons with disabilities in policy making and development, and raising ASEAN's profile through the issue of ASEAN notes and the periodic review reports on human rights, which of course is very important in the region that the work of ICHA has been ongoing for some time already. But every year they need to ensure that they work on the basis of priorities that have been agreed on. The meeting was also exchange views on the need to review the ICHA's term of reference to ensure that ICHA's role and mandate remain relevant. Also, there was discussions, I think, based on exchange views on the humanitarian and human rights concern in the region. And they want to make sure that this issue will be monitored by ICHA. For myself, of course, I also had a separate discussion with ICHA, basically in the face with the Secretary General of ASEAN with ICHA, and I gave some recommendations, particularly for them to closely engage with all the sectoral bodies concerned. Because human rights cut across all dimensions, all sectors and fields. So it's important that they need to engage all other sectors as well. This is something that I mentioned, but there was many other things, but I shared with them as well. Let me move on to the PMC, the Post-Ministerial conferences. So we have ASEAN plus each ASEAN partner. But before I go to one by one, let me try to capture the overall issues that cut across most of the, if not all, the dialogue partners. The common points that emerged in the discussion across these Post-Ministerial conferences. First is the readiness of ASEAN partners to support the implementation of the 30-year vision of ASEAN, and that is ASEAN 2045, our shared future. The second, of course, common point is the shared view across our partners of the increasing prevalence of online scams, which is a threat, and no longer merely a cybersecurity issue, but a real national crime that affects all of us. Third is the continued support for the implementation of the ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific. And several of them, in fact, highlight the complementarity between the AYP and the respective Indo-Pacific strategies and policies. Fourth, almost all ASEAN partners highlighted their support for ASEAN centrality and ASEAN-led regional architecture, upholding multilateralism, international law, and rule-based international order. Fifth, our partners expressed their support for the energy transition ASEAN, particularly the ASEAN Power Grid and the ASEAN Framework Agreement on the Petroleum Security Agreement or APSA. Sixth, of course, ASEAN's partners look forward to leveraging the potential of the Digital Economy Framework Agreement. Of course, now we have concluded the negotiations. They are going through the legal scoping, but it will be signed later this year, so I think they look forward to the fight. Next, of course, our partners discuss regional and international developments, including the situation on the Middle East, Ukraine, Palestine, and the impacts on supply chain, energy, and food security. The next issue, of course, there's been a lot of discussion on the need to maintain peace, stability, and security in the region, and the need for great dialogue and diplomacy. I think this cut across the discussions. And of course, the last point that I could identify, and that is our partners stress the important role of ASEAN in the region. I think this is quite important that they see the role of ASEAN. As you see, ladies and gentlemen, I'm of course also pleased to underscore the cooperation that our dialogue partners have with ASEAN. Particularly, we have the plan of actions. I can see that based on the reviews, that most of the plan of actions have been implemented very well. Some reaching even 100%, some 98.9%. So very high percentage of implementation of the plan of action between ASEAN and our partners. So I think this is you can see in the reports. Let me move on each dialogue partner. First, start with Australia. This year is the 5th anniversary of the CSP between ASEAN and Australia. the meeting highlighted the importance of this relationship, this partnership, and continue expansion and cooperation through the various ongoing mechanisms between the two sides, particularly various programs and projects and programs and activities. Australia's commitment and support for the AOIP through practical cooperation to implement a joint statement at the second annual ASEAN Australia Summit on Cooperation on the AOIP. The meeting also underscored the implementation of the second protocol to amend on SFOTA of the ASEAN Australia New Zealand Free Trade Agreement, or ASEAN as well. ASEAN, of course, welcomes Australia's commitment to increasing two-way trade with ASEAN through the Invest Australia's Southeast Asia Economic Strategy to 2040. The meeting was also highlighted the need to enhance cooperation in emerging areas, including digital transformation, technology, innovation, and welcome the ASEAN Australia Energy Cooperation Program to accelerate the region's transition to renewable and clean energy, including ASEAN Power Grid. Finally, the meeting was noted the ASEAN Australia Joint Foreign Ministers Statement on the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation Taxation. I want to emphasize that among dialogue partners on the Australia that has this joint statement with ASEAN. With Canada, we look forward to the 5th anniversary of the ASEAN-Canada dialogue relation next year. On this matter between the two sides, of course, we'll continue to have more discussions. Next year is going to be a very important year between ASEAN and Australia. We look forward to have the substantial conclusion of the ASEAN-Canada Free Trade Agreement this year. I think we've been accelerating the negotiation on FTA. Canada announced a $25 million Canadian contribution to support the technical assistance capacity and the implementation across its member state once the agreements go into effect. The meeting was also Canada's announcement of initiative amounting to approximately $12.8 million to support ASEAN's effort in strengthening regional security, countering transnational crime and terrorism financing, enhanced biosecurity and non-proliferation capacity, promoting safe and ethical labor migration, among other issues. Now, of course, I'm going to go back that between ASEAN and Australia, we didn't put there, but of course, there was discussion on the increase of support by Australia to ASEAN. I think the amount is very substantial. That has been already announced. Yeah. China, both sides reaffirmed their commitment to leverage this year's milestone. Of course, also we celebrate the 5th anniversary of ASEAN-China CSP and the 35th anniversary of ASEAN-China relations as well. The meeting adopted the ASEAN-China Foreign Ministers' joint statement on addressing the regional impacts of developments in the Middle East and strengthening the regional energy cooperation. The meeting was also underscored the importance of full and effective implementation of the DOC in its entirety, and look forward to continued efforts on both sides to conclude the negotiations of an effective and substantive code of conduct in such as DOC within this year, as I just mentioned earlier also. The meeting highlighted the importance of strengthening trade and economic integration, including through the implementation of the ASEAN-China Free Trade Area 3.0 Upgrade Protocol that was signed in October last year, as well as through the Regional Comprehensive Partnership. ASEAN highlighted the importance of having the digital economy. The meeting welcomed the establishment of the ASEAN-China AI Industry Innovation Center. I look forward to the establishment of the ASEAN-China Digital Academy. As it noted, China's proposal to designate next year, 2027, as the ASEAN-China Year of AI Cooperation. ASEAN also look forward to enhancing cooperation with China on sustainable development, including the areas of green economy, agriculture, food security, innovation, and environment, public innovation, narrowing development gaps, and promoting closer people-to-people ties. For the European Union, we recall the successful convening of the 25th ASEAN EU Ministerial Meeting in Brunei, New Zealand in April of this year. This is the meeting between the foreign minister to regional organizations, including as well they they reaffirm, of course, the ASEAN and EU reaffirm the importance of trade and investment relations between the two sides, particularly through the implementation of the ASEAN EU Trade and Investment Work Program 2026-2027, with the matter of an ASEAN EU Free Trade Agreement being the long-term objective. So I think again, we have raised this issue that we started to think about the long-term objective of region-to-region FTA. The meeting, of course, endorsed a concept note for the ASEAN EU Community Summit next year, 2027, during Singapore ASEAN Championship. And of course, also noted the EU's non-paper on the CSP that will be circulated in due course. With India, both sides reaffirmed their commitment to fully realize the potential of the ASEAN-India CSP, including exploring practical cooperation in areas such as defense, cybersecurity, and combating international crime and terrorism. Maritime cooperation continues to gain traction within the year 2026, being designated as the ASEAN-India Year of Maritime Cooperation. The meeting noted that the work plan to celebrate 2026 as the ASEAN-India Year of Maritime Cooperation has been finalized, and welcomed the implementation of a range of maritime-related activities, and underscored the importance of strengthening the practical maritime cooperation between ASEAN and India, because ASEAN is a maritime community, and India, of course, is a maritime nation. I think we have a lot of interest in that regard as well. The meeting look forward to the kind of conclusion of the negotiation of the review of ASEAN and India Trade and Goods Agreement. I think this has been undertaken by our ASEAN economic ministers, with the Minister of Commerce of India. I think the two sides have been undertaking this work already for some time. So we look forward to conclude this review as early as possible, as well as supporting ASEAN initiative in emerging areas such as the possible establishment of the ASEAN-India Energy Dialogue, I think in the very near future. With Japan, the meeting encouraged further synergy between Japan's updated free and open Indo-Pacific strategy and the AOIP, and to further promote practical cooperation. This is just in line with the 2025 ASEAN-Japan Leaders Joint Statement on further promotion and implementation of the AOIP. ASEAN member states encouraged the upgrading of ASEAN-Japan Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement to include emerging areas in private. Of course, between ASEAN and Japan, I always mention that we do have our own FTA through this particular agreement, and I think there's a need now. We want to see a review and an upgrade. ASEAN member states welcome further cooperation with Japan on digital transformation and innovation, as well as in food security, energy security, supply chain, artificial intelligence, leveraging Japan's strengths in these areas. We really welcome Japan's strong support for ASEAN community building, particularly through the Initiative for ASEAN Integration, Japan-ASEAN Integration Fund, and Japan-ASEAN Comprehensive Connectivity Initiative. ASEAN also commends Japan's strong support for ASEAN's energy transition efforts toward ASEAN Green Growth Agenda and regional energy resilience. We welcome Japan's efforts to promote closer people-to-people ties through the provision of scholarship, facilitate collaboration, technical and vocational education training, as well as skills development programs, including support through the II Attachment Program and the ASEAN Junior Fellowship Program. In New Zealand, the media adopted the ASEAN-New Zealand Joint Statement on strengthening regional resilience. The media underlined the need to continue strengthening ASEAN-New Zealand's trade and economic cooperation, including through the effective implementation of OSA and the second protocol to amend agreement established on SWATA. The media also look forward to the completion of the signing process of the ASEAN-New Zealand Air Service Agreement, as well as subsequent ratification and entry into force, to further enhance air connectivity, trade, tourism, and investment flow between the two sides. As implement New Zealand's initiative on human resource development, such as the Young ASEAN Diplomat Study Tour, the Young Trade and Economic Official Study Tour, the Young Business Leader Initiative, as well as the inauguration of the ASEAN New Zealand Dialogue Relations Fellowship Program. ASEAN welcomed New Zealand Climate Action Initiative, including the support for the ASEAN Center for Energy. With the Republic of Korea, ASEAN welcomed the OK CSP vision, or as the contributor springboard partner vision, which aims to advance the ASEAN OK CSP. ASEAN welcomed OK's flagship project proposal for this year, including the Korea-ASEAN response and enforcement against scam-related crime on combating online scams, and the Korea-ASEAN Maritime Safety Academy on strengthening maritime safety in law enforcement capacity. The meeting encouraged the effective implementation of 2023 ASEAN OK Leaders Joint Statement on cooperation on the AOP through concrete practical collaboration. The meeting underscored the need to strengthen trade and economic integration, especially through the ongoing negotiations to upgrade ASEAN OK free trade area, and of course the implementation of the offset. Again, this year, between ASEAN and OK, we began the negotiation to upgrade the FTA. I think this is very important to make the FTA very relevant because of the economic dynamics that is rapidly changing. I of course also want to underline as and welcome OK 3 new initiatives that will support the relation between ASEAN and OK. That of course include ASEAN Korea AI Companionship Initiative, the ASEAN OK Culture and Creative Industries Initiative, and the ASEAN OK Culture Heritage Cooperation. When we move on to Russian Federation, the meeting recorded the convening of the ASEAN and Russia Commemorative Summit on 18 June in Kazan, Russia, marking the 35th anniversary of ASEAN-Russia relations, and welcomed the 4 outcome documents of the summit. You probably noticed already the Kazan Declaration 2026, ASEAN-Russian Federation, Unity Anniversary 35 years together, the Joint Statement of ASEAN and the Russian Federation on Energy Cooperation, the Joint Statement of ASEAN and the Russian Federation on Cultural Cooperation, and the ASEAN-Russia Comprehensive Plan of Action 2026-2030, the 5-year Plan of Action. The meeting welcomed the adoption of new sectoral work plans and cooperation frameworks in areas of international crime, global-related matters, tourism, energy, digital cooperation, and of course also look forward to the adoption of the ASEAN and Russia Strategic Program on Trade and Investment Cooperation, 2026-2035. With the United Kingdom, the meeting adopted 2 key documents at this meeting. First is the Plan of Action to implement the ASEAN-OK Dialogue Partnership, 2027-2031, and the ASEAN-UK the ASEAN-UK Joint Ministerial Statement on Cooperation on the ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific Advancing Together. The meeting reaffirmed the importance of strengthening cooperation, including through the ASEAN-UK Economic Work Plan and the early conclusion of the negotiations on an ASEAN-UK Air Services Agreement. So I think again, there's a lot of substance in this meeting. Finally, we welcome UK's application to participate in the ASEAN Forum as the 28th member that will take place next year. For the United States of America, the US reaffirmed that ASEAN remains the primary platform for its engagement in civilization, and that partnership with ASEAN remains a strategic priority. The US also highlighted its commitment to the region through $2.5 billion in strategic investments and the nearly $130 million in demand assistance to the countries in this region. It be noted that the expansion of cooperation across the 3 pillars of cooperation. I look forward to enhanced cooperation to combat international crime, cybersecurity, maritime cooperation, strengthening law enforcement, and information sharing, as well as in digital economy, AI, trade, investment, resilient supply chain, transport, science, technology, and innovation, and greater private sector engagement between the 2 sides. Again, between ASEAN and the US, we have the key documents here. The main key document is being noted the ongoing negotiation of a comprehensive work plan to implement the ASEAN United States leaders' joint vision statement to promote stronger, safer, and more prosperous ASEAN and America. I think this is a work that we started for some time already, and we look forward to its referendum adoption and subsequent notation at the upcoming 14th ASEAN Youth Summit. The meeting, of course, also look forward to the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of ASEAN-US relations and the 5th anniversary of the ASEAN-US CSP next year, as well as exploring the possible convening of ASEAN-US Member Summit, also in 2027. The meeting welcomed the convening of the inaugural ASEAN-US Senior Official Meeting on Health Development and the inaugural ASEAN-US Health Ministers Meeting on the signing of the 17th ASEAN Health Ministers Meeting, and related meetings will take place in September this year. On the situation in the Middle East, of course, we had a lot of discussions there as well. And since this already covered in the various statement, I will not mention, but I just say that between the US and ASEAN member states had exchanged views on regional and international issues as well, including the situation in the Middle East, and here in the region, including the South China Sea, of course, the issue of the regional developments as well. Let me move on quickly on to the what I consider to be multilateral and trial meetings that ASEAN had with partners. Meetings of formats of the ASEAN mechanism, namely the ASEAN Plus 3, the EAS Summit, the ASEAN Regional Forum, also with health, regional discussion, practical cooperation in various areas. These meetings serve as effective platforms for exchanging views on regional and international developments, including the increasing geopolitical and geoeconomic uncertainties and the evolving situation in the Middle East, Gaza, and of course, the war in Ukraine, developments on the Korean Peninsula, and the situations in South China Sea and Myanmar. With regard to the APT, the meeting reaffirmed continued relevance as an effective platform for promoting East Asian cooperation and strengthening regional resilience, stability, and shared prosperity. The APT meeting underscored the important role of cooperation among the ASEAN Pacific cooperation in addressing emerging regional emergencies. That is through the key APT mechanisms such as the Chiang Mai Initiative Multilateralization, CMIM, the Rapid Financing Facility, APT Macroeconomic Research Office, MRO, APT Emergency Rice Reserve after, and ASEAN Food Security Information System, AFSI. The APT countries also underline the need to enhance cooperation in emerging areas, particularly in the digital transformation, AI, innovation, cybersecurity, cross-border digital trade, renewable clean energy, regional power connectivity, such as the ASEAN Power Grid, climate resilience, and the implementation of the APT Cooperation Work Plan 2023-2027. For the East Asia Summit, the ministers reaffirmed that the EAS remains a premier leaders-led forum for promoting strategic and constructive dialogue and the integral component of the evolving rules-based ASEAN Center regional architecture. There was also the need to reinforce its relevance and effectiveness, which has been underscored. This would also enable it to respond to challenges amid the rapidly evolving regional and global architecture, and of course the prevailing geopolitical dynamics and increasing global uncertainties. The EAS countries emphasize the importance of open, constructive dialogue on strategic issues within the EAS to reinforce strategic trust and address global challenges based on mutual trust, mutual respect, and mutual benefit. And of course, they reaffirm and underline the important role of EAS in promoting multilateralism and a rules-based international order. The meeting noted the continued progress of EAS cooperation made under the EAS Plan of Action, POA, 2024-2028, and encouraged EAS countries to undertake more activities under the work streams of the Plan of Action, such as finance, food security, poverty alleviation, tourism cooperation, and advancement and empowerment of women and youth, as well as the digital transformation. The EAS countries also exchange views on a wide range of issues on regional and international developments. And I will not mention because they are just mostly the same issues that have been raised, but in this particular platform. Then we move on to the ASEAN Forum. As already mentioned, that the AMM adopted in October 2025 the recommendation, the paper on recommendations to revitalize the AF. And one of the recommendations contained there is for the AF to focus on specific topics identified by the chair as priorities. For this year, there are two priorities that have been the work of the chair with the support of the members. First was enhancing maritime security and promoting maritime cooperation. The second priority is advancing cooperation and addressing emerging threats. Now, during the meeting of the AF, several participants highlighted the importance of maintaining safe, secure, and unimpeded navigation and overflying, as well as protecting maritime commerce. Also, many participants of the AF meeting expressed concern about disruption in and around the Strait of Hormuz and its implications for energy security, food security, trade, and supply chains. Many participants also expressed support for the full and effective implementation of the Declaration of Conduct of Parties in Cyprus and Sea, WC, and the early conclusion of an effective and substantive code of conduct. They also identify cyber threats and the misuse of emerging technologies as an increasingly interconnected security challenge facing the regional world, including cyber attacks against critical infrastructure, AI-enabled misinformation, autonomous weapons, malicious surveillance, online scam, and cyber-enabled terrorism. They call for strong regional cooperation on cybersecurity, including on information sharing, capacity building, incident response exercises, protection of critical infrastructure, development of responsible norms of state behavior, and strengthening legal and regulatory frameworks. Finally, we move on to the trilateral meetings. We had 4 trilateral meetings, one with Brazil, Norway, Switzerland, and India. Of course, we discussed the practical cooperation areas between ASEAN and each of our sectoral partners here. In particular, I think we noted progress of cooperation and, of course, of relations with these partners as we review several new proposals on how to further substantiate the partnership we'll put on the table as well. Let me move on quickly to the meeting that we never had before, and that is the high-level conference of the high contact parties to the Treaty of AMM and Cooperating Civilization. I think we have to give the credit to the chair of the Philippines, and of course, Member State for supporting this work. And this is one of the key highlights for this year, is the commemoration and the conference that we had, because I participated in one breakout session. There's 3 breakout sessions. One is on conflict prevention and preventive diplomacy, the second one on maritime security and cooperation, and the third one on emerging threats and challenges. And we divided all the high contracting parties to this TAC into 3 groups. And they had their intensive discussions, exchange views, and then report backs. I think clearly that based on the substantive discussion they have had among themselves. The resolved discussion was subsequently reported to the plenary so that all of us had the opportunity to listen. A theme that cut across the three breakout groups is the shared sense among the high-income parties of the continuing relevance of the TAC and the importance of its principle enshrined in the TAC. They acknowledge that in the first years, the TAC has laid the foundation of more buildings in Southeast Asia and in the regions of its high-content parties. They can stress that the next step for the following 50 years is all about reinvigorating these principles and ensuring that they are respected. In addition, the TAC is not merely just about non-building, but it also serves as a framework for practical cooperation among high-content parties. So again, this is one of the successes of this year's AMM, this back-to-back high-level conference on the high-content parties. Finally, let me give you a few of my observations. Again, this week-long meetings, series of meetings, emphasize so much about building a habit of consultation and the culture of dialogue that ASEAN has been doing for so many years, and particularly trying to continue to promote dialogue diplomacy. And what we see is that what has been working is the ASEAN diplomacy. That at the end of the day, what's important is that we must continue to promote strategic trust among ourselves. We must undertake practical cooperation through the various programs, projects, activities to see what is at work and to support each other. I think in every meeting we underline the importance of strengthening and expanding the relations, cooperation, partnership between ASEAN and each of our partners, but of course also between ASEAN and our partners through the ASEAN-led mechanisms. I think it's important that we discuss issues, and that's what we have seen, very difficult issues, but the minister discussed those issues very frankly. They will not hesitate at all in addressing this issue. They may be very uncomfortable, but yet they took on this issue, took up this issue, and had extensive discussions. Some are of course, in the format of the plenary sessions, others through retreat, and as well as through dialogue meetings. But I think this is the layers of dialogue. There are layers of meetings, and of course they lay a foundation of the relations. And I think at the end of the day, it's all about how we promote our cooperation and partnership that benefit all of us, especially the people, and of course our countries involved. With that, thank you very much, and I will welcome if you have any questions or if you have any issues to be raised. Thank you very much.
Thank you, at the podium while we open the floor for questions. For those present at the ASEAN Hall, please raise your hand if you have any question. Participants joining us from the ACTCs may submit their questions through the Zoom chat feature. If there is any question, kindly state your name, your organization, and your question. We will now take the first round of questions from the floor, please.
Well, that's good, then I can go and have my coffee then.
Can we please open another round if there is still any question from the floor, please? It seems that there is no question, so Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of today's briefing by the Secretary General of ASEAN. Thank you very much for your participation and your views.